Relative clauses. Do you get confused about whether to use which or that or who or nothing? Hi, I'm Mina and I'm an English language coach. I coach people to speak English confidently. On my Instagram page, some students have asked me to talk about relative clauses. It seems that relative clauses can be confusing for students. Can they get confusing for you? In this video, we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about when and why we use relative clauses, what kind of pronouns we have to use in relative clauses, do we really always have to use a pronoun or can we delete it? And 4, we'll talk about a different kind of relative pronoun. Are you ready? Let's get started. And we start with why we use relative clauses. By the way, what is a clause? Have you thought about that? A clause is something like a sentence. It has a subject and a verb. But sometimes one sentence can have more than one clause. It becomes a complex sentence rather than a simple sentence. Let's look at an example of this. And in this example, we will see 2 simple sentences combined together to make a complex sentence. And also we'll find out why relative clauses are actually used. So here is a sentence. The girl is my sister. It's fine, it has a subject and a verb, but we don't know which girl. In the picture, there are 3 girls. So this is not enough information. We're going to need to use a relative clause to define this noun girl better, to give more information. So which girl, Ted might ask? There are 3 girls here in the picture. The girl who is wearing a blue jacket is my sister. There you have it, a relative clause, who is wearing a blue jacket, and we use it to define, to give more information about which girl. The girl who is wearing a blue jacket is my sister. Oh, I see. So a relative clause used to define something better, to give more information. The video was really helpful. Which video? The video which explained conditionals was really helpful. Ah, yes, I agree. Another example of a relative clause to give more information. Have you seen the video about conditionals? If you haven't, there will be a link above so you can watch it. Okay, which pronouns we use? Those little words like which or who that we just saw. Well, the answer depends on what we're trying to say. So, if we're talking about people, we use who. I have a friend who loves watching Netflix. If we're talking about things, we use which. This is a desk which I bought in IKEA. We can use that instead of who or which. I have a friend that loves watching Netflix instead of who. This is a desk that I bought in IKEA, so we don't need to use who or which, we can use that all the time. It's just more informal, more casual when we use that instead of which or who. To talk about possessions, we can use whose. So that's the writer whose book I am reading. That writer in the picture, do you know him? To talk about time, we use when. A public holiday is a day when we don't need to go to work. So there's an example with when. To talk about a reason, we use why. My love of traveling is the reason why I am learning English. What is the reason why you are learning English? To talk about places, we have several options. That's the city where I was born. That's the city in which I was born. So we can use where, we can use in which. More informal, with the preposition at the end, we can say that's the city which I was born in. That's the city that I was born in. We can use whom instead of him, her, it, them when the pronoun is an object. So that's the man whom I told you about. I told you about him. So we say that's the man whom I told you about because this is an object. I am the subject. Those are the people whom we saw last year. We saw them. We are the subject. They are object. So those are the people whom we saw last year. But whom is very formal. Who is okay too. It's just more informal, but you can use who instead and say, that's the man who I told you about. Those are the people who we saw last year. When is a pronoun not necessary? Actually, when the pronoun is an object, we don't really need it. Take a look at these examples. So, that's the woman who interviewed me for the job. Here, the pronoun is a subject. She interviewed me. But in the second example, that's the woman whom I interviewed for the job. We're using whom. We can do that because this is an object. But actually, with an object, we don't even need a pronoun. We can just say, that's the woman I interviewed for the job. So we don't need this whom I interviewed. That's the woman I interviewed for the job. Can you try to figure out the next example by yourself? Which of these two sentences doesn't need a pronoun? The first one, films which are based on true events are my favorite. Second one, the film which you recommended was excellent. One of these two doesn't really need a pronoun. Which one? So if the pronoun refers to an object, you don't really need it. You can pause the video if you need to think about it. And the answer is, the film you recommended was excellent, because you here are the subject and the film is an object, so you don't need a pronoun. The film you recommended was excellent. Did you get it right? Okay, and let's talk about a different kind of relative clause. So far we talked about relative clauses being something that we use to define, to give more information, to make something clear. But sometimes we don't use them to make things clearer, we just want to add extra information. Something like in this example, Harari has written many great books. So that is the writer in the picture. We saw him before. He has written many great books. This sentence is fine on its own. I could choose to add, and by the way, he is one of my favorite authors. So this is just some extra information that is not essential. You don't need it to understand the first sentence. But we can still combine these two sentences into one with a relative clause. Harari, who is one of my favorite authors, has written many great books. So, this kind of sentence is called a non-defining relative clause. But that's not important. What's important is that with these sentences, you have a comma before and after. Harari, comma, who is one of my favorite authors, comma, has written many great books. So we just add this extra bit of information and we use commas before and after. Also, you cannot delete a pronoun in this type of sentence. And you can never replace it with that. It has to stay who or which. Harari, who is one of my favorite authors, has written many great books. You cannot say Harari, that is one of my favorite authors, has written many great books, because that is not acceptable here. Sometimes we refer to a whole sentence, a whole situation, like in this example. She couldn't come to the party, which made me very sad. This which refers to the whole situation that she couldn't come to the party. And again, commas, you cannot replace it with that, and you cannot delete it. Okay, I hope that was useful. If you still have some questions about relative clauses, feel free to ask me in the comments below and I will try to answer and maybe make another video about relative clauses. The other thing you can do now is go to my website englishwithmina.com/relative-clauses and do an activity there to practice. And you can join me on my Instagram page to learn something new every day. Don't forget, the best way to get comfortable with this, to get confident with this, is to practice by speaking and writing. So take a look at the comments, write something in the comments and use a relative clause in your comment. That's your challenge for this week. See you soon. Until then, keep practicing. Bye.